Okay, welcome. This lecture is the public's perception of social work, which is based on the LaCroix and Stinson article, which is a really good read, and I encourage you to check it out in this week's readings. It actually is looking at kind of studies of public's perception of social work, and there's been several kind of studies that, and they kind of talk about this in the review of the literature, that this was kind of done in the late 1940s, in the 1970s, again in the 90s, and actually a smaller scale, kind of in just, I think in just Alabama, kind of just a small community, kind of public perceptions, and then their current study, which was done kind of nationally, representative, a national list of random kind of telephone numbers, and they just kind of pulled them randomly and contacted these people and got their comments about social workers. And they used a survey that had been used in the earlier studies, and kind of similar questions, Likert scale, meaning kind of extremely to least extreme, or like to didn't like at all type thing. I'm not sure if I already said this, they got about 386 participants, which is really good. So as you're kind of reviewing the study, I know one of the things that we're talking about in this class is assessing the article as we're reading it. So that's actually a pretty good number in terms of the number of participants. One thing that I kind of really stuck out for me is the respondents, the characteristics. So they kind of looked at female, their gender and their status in terms of married or not, and their age, and then also their ethnicity, which was kind of interesting. And about 67% were female, kind of half, about half were married. And I think what was interesting is the ethnicity part, which was 80% were Caucasian, 6.8% were African American, and 7.1% were Latino. So just kind of in our area, that is not really a statistic that kind of shows through to kind of Maryland, but if I guess across kind of the nation, maybe a little bit different, but I don't know, it seems a little high. Or kind of pulled to one category in terms of diversity, let's just say that. So anyway, they found some interesting things, and the reason why they're looking at this is because the concept, if social work is kind of misunderstood, it's more difficult for us as professionals to kind of fulfill our mission, connect with individuals, and help them. And I think people are often motivated to make changes on our behalf as social workers if they approve of us, and kind of public approval that way of the profession. So it's kind of an interesting study. Certainly, there was better awareness in kind of the right variety of social work roles kind of in the 1970s than there was in the 1950s, but still really a lack of clarity. And we'll look at some of the statistics in a few slides, and kind of the amount of people that would accept help from a social worker was 94% in the 1978. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the statistics part. I think what's interesting is some of the changes that maybe can be seen. So appropriate social work roles, kind of seeing us as child protector or community organizer, group therapist, administrator, agent of social change, mental health therapist, psychiatric intern, legal advisor, prescribed medicine. And so kind of what roles they see are appropriate, who believe that social workers could do these roles. I think what's interesting is the agent of social change is up from 44% up to 59% kind of currently. In 1978 was 44%. So kind of this idea that we do kind of do social change and kind of part of that. And administrator-wise, I don't think they see social workers as administrators. Back in 1978, that was 30%. Now it's up to 64%. So kind of that role is seen more fulfilled by social workers than it was in the past. Of course, sources of perception about social work is important to think about too. Kind of noting personal experience or new a social worker, television, newspapers, we know that comes in, movies, books, magazines. So that's important for us to think about. Where are people getting this perception from? And kind of typical stereotypes of kind of social workers. And one I kind of just want to point out is this have a right to take children from parents. That is up from 1978. It was 19% in 1978 and is now up to 35%. So if you kind of think about maybe why that might be, certainly we could think about what we read in the newspaper or see on TV, stories that we see. How often are we maybe seeing that, and the social workers kind of role in that. So that's kind of interesting to think about. So kind of our perception of us in terms of as a profession. So social workers, counsel as well as psychologists, kind of like, I guess, more on the agree end, and neutral rather than totally disagree, but an interesting thing to think about as us as professionals. Would see a social worker if the fee was less than the psychologist. Still, people aren't too sure about that, kind of falling somewhere in the middle. And social workers are important in addressing kind of social problems. And I guess that's maybe a little bit more agreeing with that than the other two statements. So that's kind of interesting. I think certainly if we look at, maybe it's not the highest columns, but if we look at I may need help from a social worker in the future, kind of a strongly agree, and neutral is kind of heavier than disagree and strongly disagree. Social workers don't make a difference in the USA. You can see that they actually strongly disagree with that, with kind of 84% strongly disagreeing or disagreeing or strongly disagreeing with that. And that we need more social workers. So it's a good thing you guys are in school for it, right? Kind of looking at that percentage as kind of more, closer to 70%. And social workers help change social policies. And again, kind of that perception that that's not really a social worker's role maybe as much. It's kind of agree and neutral. I mean, there is some weight to it, but it seems like not as much as some of the other categories. Really our primary role is almost seen as direct practice, right? So to help individuals and families, you can see that's almost 90%. To solve community problems, that's kind of almost spread out, if you can see that. 6%, 31, 21, 37. So there's some agree, but there's some neutral and disagree on that. So they don't really see that as us solving community problems. So for those of you who plan to get into advocacy, that's something to think about. You're going to have to work on what the perception of kind of our role is, us as social workers are, and if it's not social workers doing it, I guess my question is, who is doing it, right? And to change social policies kind of falls in that too, this kind of agree and neutral category. So again, something for us to think about as professionals out there, depending on what role you plan to have. I think most people see social workers in this direct practice line, not necessarily in the administrative or policy or community end, even though we as professionals, and the previous lectures have talked about that, see that as one of our roles, one of our many roles. The good news is that we as a profession have kind of moved up on that. Social workers seen as very valuable, 60%. We're higher than psychologists, psychiatrists, and even counselors by a titch. And certainly I think I see nursing in a different category. Yeah, they're helping, but maybe you need a nurse a little bit differently than you need a social worker. So interesting statistics here to be thinking about. So as we kind of conclude this, reading this article for yourself, and then kind of what I just shared with you, kind of highlighting some of the statistics from the article, I want you to think about how do people's perception of social work impact the profession, and where do people's perceptions of social work come from, in your opinion? So this is going to be posted in the discussion board, and we'll look for some lively discussion about this, because I think it's an interesting topic, and as you're kind of either in pursuing social work or kind of taking this class because of interest in the area, whichever it is, I think it'll be interesting to hear perspectives on that. So thank you very much and have a good day.